All right. Welcome to the SumerSports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, we are back. We are here to review the 2024 NFL Draft. Thank you all, by the way, for coming to our draft show on Thursday. All of the post-draft analysis stuff that we've been doing. Thanks to everybody who's been following us along on the SiriusXM show every Friday. We are still going to do a show this Friday as well. Thomas, just a few questions. Like this whirlwind that has been the NFL draft. I know you were on Kay Adams this morning. You're Jim Rome last hour. A little bit of a whirlwind, especially considering your former team, the Falcons, make a draft pick at the quarterback position for the first time in the first round since you took Matt Ryan. What's going on, man?
Man, look, it's great to be back. I feel like we're home a little bit. So I'm glad we're doing the pod today for everyone out there. Really appreciate all your support on it. I think it's really cool. Regarding the draft, regarding Atlanta and what's going on there, obviously there's a lot there. I feel like these national media people that are reaching out are trying to dig a little bit deeper into it from a perspective of having been around Atlanta. You're around Atlanta now too, though. You're hearing a lot and seeing a lot here in your community, right? Now being a tried and true Atlanta community person. And every time I turn the corner, someone is saying something about this pick. Polarizing, is that the right word? Maybe it is. I don't think that's negative. Picks are polarizing.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife texted me, Stephanie, who's, she was substitute teaching on Friday, and she's, we got back late on Thursday night, right? So no one was up to talk to us about anything. And of course, my wife texted me like around noon the next day, and she's like, Eric, like, what did the Falcons do? And I was like, they took a quarterback that no one expected them to take. And she's like, yeah, because like everybody at school is talking about Michael Penix. And I think that's like a fair characterization. I was on this network called the Hammer Betting Network, and they were asking all of us to do a little bit of a mock draft. And they did a mock draft of kind of like what you would do versus what you think will happen. And I had the Falcons at 8, and I took JJ McCarthy with the what I would do situation because and you and I have talked about this, and I think you were ahead of this. Like, I don't necessarily think Kirk Cousins is the long-term answer quarterback. I think that the big surprise is the quarterback they took, right? If you're coming into it in March with the eval that they had, and so they had, and the reports are coming out that they had the eval on Penix as the second best quarterback in the draft, and that's all well and good. You're allowed to have that eval, of course. Now Penix is 24, going on 25. So I think that people are worried about, okay, you go to Cousins, $100 million guaranteed, 2 years, you're kind of locked into him. By the time you get to Michael Penix, he's 26. That's the kind of question marks that people are having. I think quarterback is fine if McCarthy's the pick and he's 23 by the time you get to him. So that's like, I think where people are a little bit like kind of trying to connect the dots. Like Penix is a good prospect, I think. Very good accuracy numbers, very good usage numbers, great pressure to sack ratio, a lot of good things going for the kid. Kirk Cousins is a very good bridge quarterback at worst and a very good starting caliber quarterback that can get you to the playoffs at best. And yet, like the puzzle pieces here are a little bit off, I think, for a lot of people. And so that's, I think, where the question marks come in. And I think that they're real. I think that they're realistic question marks. And it's not that, again, this could work out. And I think Terry's quotes at the end, I think, puzzled people a little bit more where he said, if he sits for 5 years, then we're in a good place because that means we're doing great at the position. So I just think that the whole thing was a little weird, but I don't think them wanting a quarterback was silly. And I don't think them wanting Kirk Cousins was silly. And I don't think that them liking Michael Penix was silly. It's just the combination of it kind of jarred people a little bit.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's jarring for certain people. I was going to take a step back, and it's easy. Let's call it this way. It's easy to pile on, right? We all get in that mode when we're watching, and it's easy to pile on what is going on. First of all, as you mentioned, I think it's important to know Michael Penix is a very good football player. And as long as his injuries play out well, right? I know he's defended that. You have a really good football player to grow with, albeit a little bit older, right? Now let's jump back to the idea of taking on Kirk Cousins as your heir apparent here. And there wasn't a whole bunch of heir apparent to be done here, right? I mean, he's not taking over for a situation that was, close. I think this organization, I'm not speaking for Arthur Blank, but knowing Arthur, knowing how competitive he is, they want to win and they want to win now, right? That's a big thing. And I think as we're looking at this, they know how important it is to bring a quarterback in. For Raheem Morris as a first-time head coach or a second-time head coach coming back in here, and Terry Fontenot in his third year, this group knows that they need to win. They need to win the fan base back, and they want to win games. And they don't only think, Eric, that this is going to be a 3, 4, 5, 6 win season. Their plans on having Kirk Cousins in here, I would imagine, not that anyone told me that out of their building, of course. I want to make that clear, that this is a lot of wins. This is deep into the playoffs and maybe making a run for the Super Bowl. You're not paying $45 million plus for someone who's just a rando, right? He's not that. He obviously. So I think just for a lot of people to understand, there is means to their approach. It's not just like they weren't thinking. I know this. That building, even though it's polarizing outside, Eric, I don't believe it's polarizing within the building. They all know. They all talk about scenario building. Arthur Blank's very involved in the way, not picking the player, of course, but they keep him updated on it, and that's a great thing for that organization. When I saw all those pictures out there, Eric, where Terry was trying to explain to him, my hunch is, at least as I know it, I can't imagine that's necessarily what they were doing. I think they were probably talking about next plans going into the next rounds, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and you're the last general manager to build a team that has won a division as a member of the Atlanta Falcons. And right now, we're looking at the betting markets here, courtesy of FanDuel. The Falcons are the favorite to win the NFC South at -120. They're a favorite against the field. So the goal that they wanted to achieve when signing Kirk Cousins so far, Thomas, has been achieved. They're the favorites, and quite heavily so, right? There, if you look, Thomas, at these other divisions, San Francisco's a bigger favorite to win their division than they are. Detroit's not. Dallas is not. Kansas City's a bigger favorite to win their division. Baltimore's not. Houston's not. Buffalo's not. So when you look at the Atlanta Falcons, only 3 teams are bigger favorites to win their own division than they are. And so the signing of Kirk Cousins has accomplished what they wanted, which is you've won 7 or fewer games every single year since Thomas Dimitroff and Dan Quinn left. And that's so you're trying to get over the hump there, and Akesh can be right all he wants with the line being wrong, and I think our simulation at SumerSports would tend to say that they're being a little heavy on the Falcons here, but they signed Kirk Cousins to get over the hump and win a division that is winnable, which they weren't able to do last year, and that's one of the reasons why Raheem Morris is the head coach, and not Arthur Smith. Now, the other part of the equation, Thomas, and why they had to sign Kirk Cousins in the first place is because since you were there, they've never, and you would admit to this, they've never taken the young quarterback to back up Matt Ryan, right? And so they've never had that guy in place to be the second to be the heir apparent. And that goes back to, again, when Terry had a chance in 2021 to take Justin Fields, they took the tight end instead, and it's kind of perpetuated itself. So what they're trying to do is kind of satisfy both masters. This is a town where the Braves are really good, right? The Atlanta Hawks are in the playoff, they're at least in the playing game, and that stadium is a stadium where it's so nice and so spacious that sometimes no one's watching the football game. And so they want somebody in there to watch the football game, and then they want to build a sustainable future. And Kirk Cousins is 35 years old off a torn Achilles. It's just, to me, I think people are questioning the particular pick, but I don't know. Like Penix very well could be a better quarterback prospect than Bo Nix or JJ McCarthy.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about this. You and I listened to it this morning. It was almost outrageous. Outrageous meaning, if you listen to Michael Lombardi's delivery on this, he was just enthused, full of passion. He obviously is completely behind his loyal friendship with Bill Belichick, of course. And that was a strong 20 minutes of passion from him. But let's just step back and dig through the passion for a minute and talk about what he was talking about. And that was this idea that's been discussed quite a bit. Why, yes, they need to win games. They need to win games now. Of course, there's always been that in the back of their mind. What if a 36-year-old pops his other Achilles, just because your minds go there, right? Michael was talking a lot about how they approached it. Why didn't they already know that this quarterback was available and he was as good as he was, that he might be available and they're going to be sitting at a sweet spot? What do you feel about that approach? And this is not about Michael's his dig at Terry Fontenot. No. It's more about the idea. Let's break through all of that for a minute. The idea of that. When you're going into free agency and you know that this quarterback is potentially available, do you still, from your perspective, snap that free agent tag off the board and go after $90 million commitment?
Well, what's the alternative? I mean, Desmond Ridder was somewhat of a flop for them. I mean, Sam Howell was available. And I know Michael had a take that he thought that Sam Howell was a better alternative to Washington than Jaden Daniels was, right? So it shows the variability in quarterback opinions among even people who have sat in that chair before. I think that, it's a lot to put on a rookie quarterback's shoulders, right? If you are Terry Fontenot, you are on year 4 of your general manager tenure. Are you going to put that on and we've already seen this, and it's not quite the same, but because Raheem is a second-time head coach, but let's assume because there's been over 10 years since he was a head coach before. We've done the numbers. Defensive head coaches who draft a quarterback with their first pick have about a 1 in 3. It's a lower success rate than normal. And I think part of that is because they know how to build a defense and they're not using the tools, which are high picks, on their craft, right? And you talk about this with Dan all the time, where he didn't get to, you guys drafted high, but it was always higher players on offense, the Jake Matthews of the world and stuff. And so it's a weird situation where you draft a high quarterback and he's going into the hands, in this case, of Zach Robinson, who's a great football mind. But Zach Robinson, let's say he goes in and he turns Michael Penix into Rookie of the Year. Well, where's Zach Robinson going? He's going to be the head coach of some other team next year. And so now Raheem and Terry now have to scramble to get Michael Penix his next coordinator. And so I think that, like, you look down and it's just risky to put, a must-win season, frankly, in the case of Fontenot, less so for the case of Morris, into the hands of a young quarterback, as good as I think Michael Penix can be. And so I think that having Cousins there, everybody knows Kirk Cousins is a shoo-in to be 8 to 10 wins every year. And if you get 10 wins with this Falcons team, everybody's going to be happy here, right? Everybody wants this Falcons team to be relevant because it really hasn't been for the last 3 or 4 years. And so that's I think, the point. And so they're trying to serve two masters. And here's the other thing. And no one wants to hear this because, and especially not probably not you, because you love, the whole game, you love scouting everything. And I'm kind of more the analytics guy, but if Michael Penix hits or if Kirk Cousins hits, none of this matters, right? If Kirk Cousins throws for 40 touchdowns this year, the fact that they didn't take Dallas Turner at 8 doesn't matter, because there's going to be so much meat left on the bone for them that, and if Kirk Cousins sucks and if Michael Penix sucks, it's not going to, you know what I'm saying? So they're trying to get the biggest problem out of the way, which is quarterback. And just like you did in 2008, right? If Matt Ryan didn't hit in 2008, we're not talking about the story, in certain ways, right? And so you get the first problem out of the way. Again, I'm not trying to play an apologist for them. I'm just more trying to see it from their perspective, which is, get the first problem out of the way, which is short-term quarterback, long-term quarterback. And in the case of Penix, like I tend to believe that he could be good short-term, but if I'm Terry Fontenot, if I put my career on it, maybe I'm less likely to believe that.
Well, I think you also have to think about Raheem Morris is coming in, a second-time head coach, first time with the Falcons, of course, highly energetic, highly positive. The organization wants to be upbeat and positive in a good way. Kind of, it harkens back to times with Dan Quinn, right? A lot of positivity. Like you said, this is not about apologizing because it is a complicated situation. We know that academically. You know that academically, and the group that's listening does. Trying to figure out why is what we're discussing here. And I think it's important to have both of those sides of the coin to talk about, Eric, versus just bad polarizing pick. Why are they doing it? They're not thoughtful on it. This is not about that right now. It's about, okay, again, Raheem comes in. You want to turn that fan base around. So how do you do it? Arthur Blank, back to my point earlier, he is willing to give, right? Arthur Blank has always put his complete life into providing for the Falcons. He never came up short with money for me as a general manager, not me personally, but for us to go out and do things. This is another case of that, right? I mean, he will pay to give this organization the best opportunity, and time will tell if it was the best.
I would say though, and I do think like very difficult. I mean, we are rationalizing this decision. This is a decision that I don't think either one of us necessarily would have made, and it's a decision again that I think people are right to question, and it's okay to question, and it's okay to Monday morning quarterback these things because for one, it's sports and it's supposed to be fun, and you know, there's an element of trying to explain something. Maybe again, I'm not trying to say it's right. I'm just trying to explain maybe what's going through people's heads here. And you know, I'm one of the biggest Kirk Cousins, I wouldn't say haters, but like I always thought the Kirk Cousins contract in Minnesota held them back, and I do think that in Atlanta, the goals are different, right? When Kirk signed with the Vikings in 2018, that team was 13-3. They were in the NFC Championship game. He was supposed to help them win a Super Bowl. This Falcons team has won 7 games or fewer for 4 or 5 years in a row. He's supposed to get them 8 or 9 wins, which is what Kirk Cousins specializes in. And so I think that signing makes more sense for them. This Penix draft pick, along with the Cousins signing, is something that makes kind of everybody's eyebrows go up quite a bit. And so to try to explain it from their perspective, it's just, they're just planning for the future. And I think people are rightly questioning, well, how the Penix's age and that kind of thing. Now, I will say this on Penix's front. He has not gotten hurt the last 2 years enough to miss games. I do think he was injured a little bit last year, which hurt his performance down the stretch. But people give him the off injured label. He has been healthy for most of the last few years. And so I do think, especially considering how little he takes sacks, I think it's an overblown narrative for him. But again, this was a puzzling pick when it happened. And it'll be interesting to see what the Falcons end up with as a result of this.
So just to finish on this, and we understand that this fan base, right, has been talking about a legitimate pass rusher. So when your head's around that, and they didn't get a chance to address necessarily the bona fide pass rusher that they were looking for or that was rumored to happen, right? So they go after their second pick. They move up, by the way, which you know exactly how to pronounce his name. I don't, so I'm going to let you attempt it. But before we move on, that's where I think some of the agitation comes as well. Who's going to rush the passer this year? And
for sure. Yeah, and I actually am not very good at pronouncing the defensive lineman picks. Rook Okororu from Clemson, another Clemson pass rusher. The last time a Clemson pass rusher went in the first 2 rounds, he led the NFL in sacks, which was your guy, Vic Beasley, who actually right now is playing for the Arlington Renegades of the UFL. But that's an interior rusher. They have not gotten good. I mean, you say it as much yourself. It's like this team has struggled getting edge pressure all the way back to John Abraham, right? All the way back to, even Vic Beasley, for his moments, edge pressure doesn't grow on trees. And there were Dallas Turner, Laitu Latu, Jared Verse. Now, those three men went 15 or later, which would suggest that the Falcons could have gotten them by trading back. But at the same time, who knows what the market would have been. I do want to transition because that does transition into this one also, because the Minnesota Vikings at 10 with the trade up with the Jets took J.J. McCarthy. From what I can tell, they like McCarthy quite a bit. It sounds like from reports that they wanted Drake May. There was no appetite for New England to trade back with them, even though the Vikings offered 11, 23, next year's first, so 3 first-round picks to move up, as well as some pick swaps that were advantageous. I also think that there was a chance. Now, I have not heard this reported. I have not heard this off the record at all. But there's also probably a chance that they wanted Penix. That's another reason why the Falcons probably just took him at 8 as opposed to trading back. I'm just reading the kind of board here. The Vikings stay and take J.J. McCarthy, now quarterback 5 on the board. Again, a younger guy, less usage, kind of the exact opposite player of who Michael Penix is. Now, from the Vikings' perspective, it's quite a bit different of a situation. The thing about the Vikings in this situation is it's kind of the opposite, right? Like the Vikings have had 13-win seasons. They've kind of pressed up against the NFC Championship game in the last 5-6 years, but they've also kind of bottomed out here. They're the 4th best team in this division per odds. They're looking up at the Bears, who just got Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze in this draft. They're looking up at the Packers, who just had, Jordan Love emerge this year, who just were in the divisional round. And they're looking up at Detroit, who was one bad half of football away from being in the Super Bowl. They needed to swing for the fence, and it looked like they wanted to with Drake May. Now they have J.J. McCarthy. It looks like McCarthy is going to sit in year 1, and it looks like reports are it's due to the fact that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell have done extensive studies on the benefits of sitting in year 1. Now, there is not a ton of evidence for the benefits of sitting in year 1. And this as good as anybody. You put Matt Ryan out there, day 1, 3-point underdogs against a team in Detroit who would not win a game all year, and he went out and he won 10 games for you right away. When you think about J.J. McCarthy and his just lack of data in college, don't you just want to throw him out there in year 1 and just, especially considering expectations are going to be low for Minnesota this year, do you just want to throw him out there and play?
Yeah, I'm a play now guy. This has to do with what I've talked to you many times about, Eric. Not for long league, even more so than ever. It means making sure that you're seeing what he's capable of sooner than later. I know that some people think that's premature. If you put the right team together, you're creative how you do it. You take some pressure off of him by not expecting him to do everything and be the world. I think making sure that you have strong people around him and being creative is a big, big deal, and getting him out there. I'm a fan of moving forward to try to get him early reps, no question.
Yeah, I just think about it because look, like we have the Patrick Mahomes sat a year. We have Jordan Love sat 3 years. Both guys ended up being, from all, great. But we also have Paxton Lynch sat. We also have Trey Lance sat. And we have, when you look at the data, it's about equal. Guys who sat end up being good, end up not being good. I think about it from Trey Lance's perspective. Trey Lance has almost no data to his name, goes to San Francisco, doesn't really play much, gets hurt, doesn't really play much, and doesn't develop. And so I'm just thinking to myself, you have 2 great tackles in Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw. You have Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, who you spent premium capital on. They're probably going to give Jefferson a contract extension soon. What better way to get reps and you play indoors? What better way to get reps in this NFL and to figure out if you're good or not than to just go out there and play right away, especially considering they have running backs like Ty Chandler are pretty good. They brought in Aaron Jones from Green Bay. Like they're going to be able to run play action. They're going to be able to do these things that will make him comfortable. I know Sam Darnold's there. I know they spent $10 million on him, but to me, I think it would be a blunder if they sat him. And because your future's inextricably tied to him, and you might as well find out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I think finding out as quickly as possible means, again, making sure that you have the right people around. They have legitimate people around him, to your point, right? However, when there's kind of this new wave of people talking about maybe the Green Bay Packers approach is a way that everyone should approach it moving forward. But that's very different, right? Playing behind a guy like, playing behind a guy like Aaron Rodgers, right? It's not the same. There's different elements to it, right? When you're around a guy who's one of the best quarterbacks to play the game versus some of them that are more midline players, in my mind. So I love the competitiveness of this kid. I know he's happy to be there and everyone's happy for him. I wonder truly if they did want Michael Penix. Very interesting to think about that. But it is what it is now. I think you roll forward on it. Like I said, I think you get him playing right away as soon as possible.
Yeah, I just think that you're right. I mean, it is totally different when the guy is even Alex Smith, who, Alex Smith led the league in passing the year that Mahomes sat behind him. Alex Smith had led the team to 12 wins the year before they drafted Mahomes. Alex Smith is kind of the starter that you have that Alex Smith is like the starter that you want to replace when you can't win a Super Bowl. But he's good enough to play over a guy like Mahomes for 1 year, even though as a Chiefs fan, I would have rather them played Mahomes and see, taking their chances that year. It makes sense. Rodgers, again, makes sense. Back in the day, the Bears drafted Jim Harbaugh while they still had Jim McMahon. The Niners drafted Jim Druckenmiller while they still had Steve Young. Like, there are tons of these examples. The Broncos drafted Tommy Maddox while they still had John Elway. Like, I think those are fine, especially when your team is good, when you take the luxury pick on a quarterback. In the case when it's like Sam Darnold or Chad Henne, or you're just delaying the inevitable, in my opinion. And if in the situation where the guy ends up being pretty good, Thomas, you waste games, right? Because you could start out 0-3 and finish the year, 7 and whatever, and then you miss the playoffs based upon games that the first guy started that he shouldn't have been starting.
It's a great point. We'll be interesting to see how they play it out, though, right? And they have some veteran people there, as you know, with guys like, there's just some guys on their staff, of course, that are probably pressing for it in a certain way with Kwesi to see what's going to go on. And Ryan, Grigson, guys like that who are tried and true football people, be interesting to know what their play is on it.
Yeah, let's talk, because we got a good question from Difficult here. He said, if you need a quarterback and don't trade up, how much of a reach does the player have to be for it to actually be a bad pick? Asking for the Broncos. It's a little bit of a leading question because Bo Nix was expected to go at about 32. He went at 12. We've seen that happen a few times. Like Christian Ponder comes to mind as a guy who went exactly 12 to the Vikings. Dante Culpepper was another one. 2000. So you get both sides of the coin. Culpepper ended up being pretty good. Ponder didn't. The Broncos didn't have a second-round pick. So that was going to be when they took their quarterback, or if they traded back. But trading back there weren't that many trades in the first round, Thomas, right? So I think Nix was certainly in the basin of quarterbacks, so I'm not going to skewer them for doing it. But it did seem a little bit rich for my blood to take him at 12. He has some good traits. He's a little older, but he does fit into what Sean Payton wants to do. Where do you see this one? I think the Broncos are going to do the right thing and just play him right away through thick and thin. Where do you see that one going? Because I see a possible success story here, even though the Broncos are not a great place for a young quarterback to play right away, because they're still reeling off of the Russell Wilson trade and the dead money, and having to trade Judy and having to trade let go of some of their defense. They're going to struggle as a team, but I think Bo Nix individually might get some of the best coaching that any of these young guys get from Sean Payton.
I think the Sean Payton, Bo Nix thing is quite positive in my mind. I've talked about him from the beginning of evaluating these guys. He is a guy that was on my mind as it being an interesting guy. Yes, a little bit older, but he's mature. He's tough. He's a good athlete. He's going to run the ball when he needs to run it, and he'll jam it down people's throat if he has to. He's a tough, competitive person as both a runner, of course, when he has to, but also as a guy that's going to throw the ball. He's a smart football player who's a system guy, which I think is really good for Sean. I like it. I also think it's good, even though some people think you could have traded back 2, 3, 5 picks. Look, when you're a general manager, I get that. But also when you think there might be a run on quarterbacks and there's no one else out there, and you know how important quarterback is to you, you're damn right you will focus on 3, 4, or 5 picks. Is almost like nothing, as odd as that sounds, right? I know there's a lot of talk about it, but in lieu of missing on a player like that, because I'm sure he would have gone by, I don't know, it seems like the next 2 or 3.
He would have gone with the Raiders in the next pick,
Yes.
right? Their division.
Yes. So jump up, take care of business, and know that you have a coach that can probably out there. He's one of the best coaches to teach a guy like this to continue to learn. Again, there's a veteran element to this guy that is good. I think the team needs it. I think George Payton, who I've talked about many times, that was a tough go with him, with Russell Wilson, but here he is now in a good, solid, sound spot here for them to continue to grow and to kind of right the quarterback situation that was a lot challenging in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think the Broncos, not to be too shameless here, but I think the Broncos are really the type of team that would really benefit from some of the work we're doing here at Sumer, of course, because they're not working with a full deck of cards as far as resources, right? The draft picks, I mean, they needed to send draft picks over to New Orleans just to get Peyton, of course, and they've had to trade players off to make sure that they have, they're under the cap and cap compliant over the next 2 years to deal with the dead money. I mean, they can't spend any money right now because they had to post June 1 Russell Wilson when they let him go in the first place and so forth. So, as far as building this team, they're going to have to get creative. They're going to have to, they're going to have to do things that a lot of teams don't need to do. And luckily for them, they have the Waltons, they have ownership that will be generous as per the Sean Payton acquisition. So that's a good thing. There are some teams, you think about Kansas City, you think about Dallas, you think about teams that aren't spending a ton of money on a cash basis. And then you talk about teams like you said, Atlanta with Arthur and Cleveland and Philadelphia and Minnesota and now, Denver, who are willing to spend and prorate, have an advantage in these cases. But even then, you still have to be cap compliant, and Denver has to do some things, I think, that are going to be a little bit sharper because of what they're dealing with. Now, if Bo Nix hits, to the point I made about Penix, it's going to be easier, right? Just the same as when Patrick Mahomes hit, a lot of the Chiefs' mistakes were papered over by his brilliance. And so that should be a good thing. I want to go back to New England here because this your former place, Elliott Wolf, Gerard Mayo. My narrative was I didn't think New England was good enough to take a quarterback at 3. I was disagreed with. They took a quarterback at 3. I thought they had a really good draft up and down. They took players of value, kind of Jalen Poe. I thought that they did a good job all draft. And so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were able to restock this roster with this particular draft, and Drake May has a chance. In addition, they have, Mayo and so forth. The coaching staff can be – it's hard for me to believe that this coaching staff can be better than Belichick's coaching staff. But, I felt like they needed to build the roster up with picks from having the 3rd pick. They got big offers. They got a big offer from the Giants. They got a big offer from the Vikings. They took May instead. Everybody liked May from what I can tell. The Vikings liked May. The Giants liked May. A bunch of teams like May. Now that we've seen the die cast here, still the right move for them to take a quarterback at 3.
I like the move at 3. I've said this as well. I think Elliott Wolf comes from stock. His dad, who was a Hall of Fame team builder in the NFL. They know the importance of bona fide, legitimate talent at the quarterback position. There hasn't been one there in the last few years, of course, one that they can hang their hat on and grow with for years to come. Yes, there are elements to Drake May that need some work, like all of these quarterbacks, as good as they are. I love this draft class because I think there's a lot to come to the table and build on. Yes, he might need a little bit of work on his footwork, et cetera, et cetera. But this is about everything, right? This is about the full package here. As much as people say, oh, I should have moved back and got a lot, I get that respectfully to you all on the data side where you see the benefit of it. But the opportunity to get someone like this, you're not getting them in next year's draft, of course. I'm saying you're not getting the same talent group. And so I think it is the right thing for them to do. And I wouldn't have made the move myself. As attractive as it is, you look at it, Eric, you consider it. But you also consider there's no way to win in this league without a quarterback. You can't win, in my mind, and be a legit team with a middling quarterback.
I think that that's so refreshing for you to say, because you have, like, how many football people, like, so I consider you're obviously very progressive, and, you know, we're obviously have this, you know, working relationship, this friendship. And so we were back and forth on stuff, but you are a dyed-in-the-wool football person, right? And yet you said something that I think all analytics people would agree with 100%, which is the quarterback is all that matters to a certain extent. I mean, not all that matters, but it's the necessary condition, not a sufficient condition, but a necessary condition. How many so we just saw a draft where 6 quarterbacks went in the first 12 picks. Is that, I started to wane on my opinion that the NFL believed what you just said, which is that you can't win without a premium quarterback. And yet in this draft, we got rebutted on that. Like, the NFL just bellied up to the bar and said, no, like, we're going to try to get our franchise quarterback. Because I felt like over the last few years, and this is one of the reasons why I was skeptical that we get all 6 guys in the first round, because I felt like over the last few years, we saw guys pass on Mike, you know, we pass on Will Levis. We saw guys like pass on Malik Willis and maybe just they're better at evaluating quarterbacks than the public. And they're just like, those guys suck. But can you expound upon, like, that does appear to be Elliot Wolf's opinion, Ron Wolf's son, right? That you cannot win without a great quarterback. And do you think that the majority of the league now has that opinion? And not only that opinion, but the one that you said, which I think is a little stronger, you cannot win without a quarterback who is a blue chip type player, a top 12 draft pick.
Yes. And remember, you're talking about not only the skills that Drake May has on the field, representing as a team member going into this is great for the New England Patriots, right? I mean, he's a smart guy. He's a top-notch leadership type individual guy. So when you're a general manager and a neophyte general manager, and believe me, I've been a neophyte general manager, there's a lot to that. You're learning, you've known a lot, because again, Elliot's been around his father a long time. They talked about this. You better take a shot at it. Back to not for long. You get usually one opportunity as a GM to pull a legit big time pick at the quarterback position. You probably get 2 shots to run the situation as a coach, to hire your coach. This quarterback situation, if you're going to mess up, you better mess up on trying for a guy that you know has a lot on the table. The probability is what? How many of this group of 6, is it 3 or 4 that are going to not work out? 3, maybe 4, depending.
I think the expectation is probably 4, right? That don't work, and 2 guys end up being bang up quarterbacks, right? Just like most. And it's interesting. I had Bill Polian on a different podcast, and he was saying that the difference between then and now is we push so many quarterbacks into round 1 that, some of those guys would have been round 2 guys later because of the way that they cost. And so the hit rates are lower now. But yeah, I mean, the hit rates are going to be a little, for a 6 quarterback draft, it's going to be probably 2 or 3 that are going to work. And I'll take that, because it's not just about 1 or 0. Like when Matt Ryan hit for you, it was a 13-year career. It's not just, way to go. It's a long-term, successful. Falcons had never had back-to-back winning seasons. and now all of a sudden they have 3 straight winning seasons. You know what I'm saying? Or 4 straight, 5 straight, and then and you're going through that, and it ends up being the return is so phenomenal when you hit on a guy. New England, they hit on Drew Bledsoe in 1993, then they hit on Tom Brady in 2001, and you're talking about 30 years of the franchise almost moving to St. Louis, and then now being like one of the most profitable, franchises in sports history, right? Like when you hit on a quarterback, all these things shall be added onto you, so it's totally worth it to go for these guys.
And remember, all of that you're saying is so correct. It is a lot easier, and more beneficial, of course, to have a quarterback who is a good quarterback or a good to very good to excellent quarterback versus, solid when you're picking players, right? It makes that pick for a tight end that much better for you, or that pick for the receiver, or that pick for the running back, or your O-line, when you have a package guy like this that can change the production and the skills and the talent and the end-all hit on the other positions. I truly believe that. If you have some very good football players coming in, when you have a middling quarterback, it just makes everything so complicated. And the players that you think are going to thrive, they tend to take a step back because they just don't have that quarterback talent around them to shoot for the next level. And it can be, you want to talk about something that drives you nuts as a team builder when you don't have a quarterback playing for you. Again, this is obvious, but I'm just saying the stresses in that organization from day to day, month to month, season to season, and year to year, I can't even begin. And that also goes to the owner, right? You have an owner in your ear all the time. That's not a fun place to be, of course.
Well, it just makes everything so much harder, to your point. Like I remember talking to one of my friends in the league, and I had done this research on weak links and how important it is to have your weakest player. And like, so for example, the 5 men on your offensive line, the most important one as far as statistically is the 5th one. The 5th best one is your offense goes as they go. But the fact is, if your best lineman is next to the 5th best lineman, it makes the 5th best lineman better. And to your point about quarterbacks is like, if your quarterback can protect his offensive line, he makes the whole offensive line, including your 5th best offensive line, better. So as a team builder, you're all of a sudden better at picking the worst offensive lineman on your team because your quarterback's better at covering him up. To your point about tight ends, same thing with tight ends. Like that first round tight end, like Brock Bowers is a great player. He goes to Vegas. Who the hell is throwing him the ball is a good question as far as whether or not Brock Bowers is going to work out. Same thing with like all these tight ends that have gone in the top 10. In the past that have failed. Well, of course, David Njoku is going to struggle with Cleveland when Cody Kessler, Deshaun Kaiser, and all these other guys are throwing him the ball. And so there's elements to that. I know you talked about on Kay Adams' show about, trading up and trading down. Like if you trade up for a guy and your team's already good, he's going to do better than if you trade up for a guy and your team's not very good. Like there's elements to this that are apparent. The last thing I want to talk about, and I know we've been pretty quarterback centric on this, is 1983 was the last time we had 6 quarterbacks in round 1. Interestingly, in that draft, there also was no quarterback taken in rounds 2, 3, and 4. The same thing happened this year. So no quarterbacks went in the 1983 draft in rounds 2, 3, and 4, and no quarterbacks went 2, 3, and 4 in this round either. So, Spencer Rattler went in the 5th round, and Michael Pratt went in the 7th round. We talked about Michael Pratt on the Sirius show. We had a few other quarterbacks in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round. How do you interpret that? Because there's no way that there's that big of a gap between Spencer Rattler and Bo Nix from a talent standpoint. So how do you see it that as teams are just not willing to kind of do what the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts, what the Commander back then, they were called something different, but the Commanders did with Kirk Cousins and RG3? Are teams just not willing to put kind of a young guy with some potential back there? Because I look at this league and I watch kind of the pace of play. Last year, the average game had less than 44 points in it. And I think, how many starting quarterbacks did we have? A lot. And I'm looking at this draft. And I'm like, I love the fact that 6 quarterbacks going round 1. I'm less crazy about the fact that no quarterbacks went rounds 2, 3, and 4. Do we have a quarterback development problem, or is it rational to wait until round 5 to get your kind of developmental player?
I think the latter. I think the people that needed the quarterback were going, and they ostensibly could have been pushing their need, as we've talked about, right? In other years, maybe they were second rounds. They realized, let's do it now. Let's just go for it. Let's look at the trade charts and decide we're going to make this move. And then the down the line guys that are drafted, I do maybe disagree with you a little bit. I do think there's a difference between Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler. That's what I think. I think there are a number of different things that I think, Bo is that much more positive on. But as a team, you're thinking, okay, we have a lot of other areas here. There are some really good running backs here, some really good receivers. There are some good defenders in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Let's focus there, and then let's revisit for a lot of those teams that are looking for the second, the number 2 later on. And the other teams are saying, we'll get there if we get there. If not, we'll figure it out another time. It feels like that's how I would look at it probably. Like there's a lot of really good players here that we could take care of in these rounds. And the ones who really need them already picked them in the 1st round. So it's just like a little bit of a dead space right now. And it may start going that way. I don't know. Depends from year to year, of course.
Yeah, I just wish – because the NFL did change a rule that was really subtle this offseason, by the way, where you can elevate a quarterback from the practice squad to be your 3rd stringer. And maybe I'm overreacting. I just don't think that that's good for the league, right? Because the rules on practice squad guys where like they're kind of transient, right? Like you can sign a guy off a guy's practice squad to be on the 53 anytime. And I can't get the image shaken from my head of the 2014 playoffs where Case Keenum started a game, or John Skelton started a playoff game. Ryan Lindley, they're all the same. Ryan Lindley started a playoff game, and he started the year with the Cardinals on the practice squad, was signed with San Diego, and then back on the Cardinals. I'm like, he cannot be developing, being transient on all these teams. Same thing happened with Case Keenum. And I'm just thinking to myself, there aren't really mechanisms for these teams to sign and stash quarterbacks and develop them. And yet at the same time, I look and I think, well, 1st-round quarterbacks are cheap anyway, so why not just continue to recycle them? But it's I don't know. I look back at a league where the Jake Delomes and Brad Johnsons and Mark Bulgers and those guys were all playing in Super Bowls. And now when we get in the dog days of December and there's some bad quarterbacks who are underdeveloped playing in the NFL, and I kind of get sad for kind of the quality of play. That's where I worry about that gap between rounds 2, 3, and 4 and teams. Because if you draft a guy in round 5, there's no guarantee he even makes your club, right? Whereas if you take him in round 3, you're investing at least some time and effort into developing him. And I think that's holistically better for the NFL.
I agree. And you're exactly right. The last thing you want to do is lose a player in the 3rd or 4th round. It's just not good. It's not good for it's not good for the morale. It's not good for their owner. It's not good for the GM. That's a great point.
So yeah, it's just interesting. So anyway, this was fun. Okay, let's end with this. What was your favorite? Which team had the favorite draft for you?
Look, I keep coming back to Howie and his ability to trade around and get what they wanted to get. I love the fact that they got a corner as they did in Quinyon Mitchell. And, because I think he is a heck of a talent. And I love the fact that they came back in the 2nd round and they didn't reach on Cooper DeJean, right? It's that way. I always wonder if it's Cooper or is it DeJean? Yeah, it's Cooper DeJean in the 2nd round. Look, there are a lot of teams out there. Arizona, I love what Monty Austinforth did, of course. And I like what, as you know, and you can talk about him a little bit, I really like what Dan Quinn and Adam Peters did up in Washington.
Yeah, Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, Cardinals and Commanders, you're not going to ever get a bad grade from me for having as many picks as they had. That is, really I think that's just restocking, right? And the Commanders both the Commanders and Cardinals needed players. I think Jerry Newton, a great value for the Commanders in round 2. Obviously, Daniels is the face of the franchise now. Cardinals get Harrison, which is just a great player to pair with Murray. Murray was always at his best when you had DeAndre Hopkins there, and so forth. So I like both of those drafts a lot. My favorite draft, and I know, look, 3 months ago I could barely pronounce his name, but now I love his draft. Joe Ortiz, Corey Krawick, and the Los Angeles Chargers. I gotta say, everybody was saying, "Oh, they're going to take J.C. Latham at 5 and yada yada yada." They hung tight at 5. They took Joe Alt, right? Like the John Alt, Chiefs legend, his son to play tackle for them. Now you think about this team, they were barren from a talent standpoint. Terrible cap situation. They come in, they clean the thing up. They get a 4th round pick for Keenan Allen. They have a great quarterback in Justin Herbert. They have Alt. They do a pick swap. They somehow manage to trade up in the 2nd round and lose no value. Look at the charts. They figure out how to trade up without giving up a ton. They get Ladd McConkey, a guy both of us like at wide receiver, which is a great pick. Junior Colson, the linebacker from Michigan, who obviously Jim Harbaugh likes a lot. And a running back, by the way, who I really like as well, Kamal Vidal from Troy, who I know I've talked about in here. Big bowling ball kind of running back, a toughness guy that Chargers have gotten kind of a reputation for being soft in recent years. I really like him both speed-wise but also ability. And then they get Jerry Rice's kid in the later rounds, Brendan Rice from USC. I like that draft a lot. I think the Chargers, obviously uphill battle, looking up at the Chiefs. They have not won that division since 2009. Ortiz, I think, has gone in there and done a good job in building that team. It's the long haul for them, right? Like, they're not going to go and win that division right away. It's not going to be like the Niners when Harbaugh took over in 2011. That team was ready-made, an underachieving team. This Chargers team is going to take a little bit, but I thought that their draft class was really – I thought they did a really good job.
I think Joe coming in there, Ortiz, with Jim Harbaugh, there's just a good synchronicity there between them both. They have the personalities that need to roll together. They, look, as well as I do, Joe coming from Baltimore with all of that background with Ozzie Newsome and that group, he's going to be a really good addition for that franchise, along with a head coach that we all know can coach. It's going to be fun to watch how those two operate coming years.
Yeah, for sure. And now Tom Telesco never traded back in all those years with the Chargers. They still didn't trade back this year, but they did make some sound picks. This was a lot of fun, Thomas. People have been asking for you back on the show. The reception here has been phenomenal. The chat's been great. Thank you all for coming here on a Monday. Thank you all for coming, like I said, to the live show on Thursday. All of our content, we're going to continue to roll out content. If you don't, go to our YouTube show. We have a ton of great stuff from Mike Mayock. We have a ton of great stuff from all the folks we brought to Detroit. We want to thank our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy, for all their support for this past weekend. This has been a great time. Thomas, this has been fun. For Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the SumerSports Show.